You're crouched beside a fire 500,000 years ago. Across from you, someone suddenly freezes. They look toward the darkness, then at you. No words are spoken, but somehow you know exactly what they mean. Something is out there, and you need to move. Here's the strange part. There are no names, no sentences, possibly no language at all. Yet these people can hunt together, raise children, teach each other how to make tools, cross enormous stretches of unfamiliar land, and somehow pass knowledge from one generation to the next. So how do you teach someone something when you can't explain it? How do you plan a hunt when you can't describe the plan? And how do you tell another person what you're thinking when the words for those thoughts don't exist yet? For most of human history, our ancestors may have faced exactly that problem, and the clues they left behind suggest something unexpected. Language may not have created human communication. Human communication may have existed for an incredibly long time before words ever arrived. To understand how strange this is, look at the timeline. Our genus, Homo, has existed for more than 2 million years. Modern spoken language is often proposed to be far younger, although exactly when language emerged remains fiercely debated. Even relatively generous estimates leave an enormous stretch of human evolution before anything resembling modern language. Think about what happened during that time. Our ancestors learned to control fire. They manufactured increasingly sophisticated tools. They traveled across continents. They hunted dangerous animals in groups, and they raised children who survived long enough to repeat the process. All without leaving us any direct evidence of sentences, grammar, or even personal names. Something was allowing information to move from one mind to another. But what? Strangely, one of our first clues isn't something our ancestors left on a cave wall. It's a tiny bone buried inside the throat of a Neanderthal. In 1983, archaeologists working at Kebara Cave in Israel uncovered the remains of a Neanderthal. The skeleton was roughly 60,000 years old, and inside the neck was something extremely rare, a hyoid bone. Touch the front of your throat. Your hyoid is sitting in there right now. It helps anchor structures involved in movement of the tongue and larynx, making it important to speech. And the Kebara Neanderthal's hyoid looked remarkably similar to ours. That immediately raised an extraordinary possibility. Neanderthals may have possessed some of the anatomical equipment necessary for controlled vocal communication. But that creates a much bigger problem, because being physically capable of producing complex sounds doesn't mean you have language. The mouth is only the instrument. Something still has to invent the music, and decades later, scientists discovered another piece of the puzzle, this time inside Neanderthal DNA. In 2007, researchers studying ancient DNA reported that Neanderthals carried the same two derived changes in a gene called FOXP2 that are found in modern humans. FOXP2 is involved in neural circuits important for speech and language, including fine motor control. Damage to it in humans can severely affect the ability to coordinate the movements required for normal speech. So now we had something fascinating. Neanderthals apparently possessed parts of the anatomical machinery associated with speech, and parts of the genetic machinery associated with it. The equipment may have been there, but none of this tells us what Neanderthals were actually saying, or whether their communication worked anything like modern language. And that's where the story gets much stranger, because one of the most important steps toward language might have had nothing to do with the mouth. It may have started with a finger. Watch a human toddler who hasn't learned to speak yet. Something interesting happens. They point, not only because they want something, sometimes they point simply because they want you to look. A dog outside. An aeroplane overhead. Something strange on the floor. They look at it, then at you, then back at it. The message is obvious. Do you see what I see? Psychologist Michael Tomasello spent decades studying communication and cooperation in humans and other great apes, and he identified a crucial difference. Chimpanzees can use gestures. They can learn to point in some circumstances, but humans are unusually motivated to point simply to share attention and information. Tomasello describes this capacity as part of shared intentionality, and it may be one of the most important abilities humans ever evolved, because before you can tell someone, there's an animal behind that tree. You need something more fundamental. You need both minds to understand. We are paying attention to the same thing. That shared mental space may have existed before vocabulary, and once it existed, our ancestors had another incredibly powerful tool available: their entire bodies. Imagine trying to communicate an animal without saying its name. You could imitate its horns, its walk, its size. Imagine describing throwing a spear. You could simply perform the motion. A river, trace its path with your hand. A direction, point. This is one reason cognitive scientist Michael Corballis argued that language may have deep roots in gesture. Gesture has one enormous advantage over sound. It can resemble what it represents. A movement can look like throwing. Hands can imitate horns. A finger can indicate a direction. A random vocal sound doesn't naturally resemble a river or a spear, which raises an extraordinary possibility. Some of humanity's earliest symbolic communication may not have been heard at all. It may have been seen, but then archaeology gives us a harder problem. Because nearly 2 million years ago, our ancestors began producing objects complicated enough that simple pointing shouldn't have been sufficient. Objects like this, the Acheulean hand axe. And making one is much harder than it looks. Around 1.7 million years ago, early humans were producing Acheulean hand axes, beautifully shaped stone tools, often symmetrical, sharp along their edges, and remarkably consistent across enormous stretches of time and geography. Making one requires planning. You don't simply smash two rocks together. You have to select suitable stone, control the angle of each strike, manage the force, understand how one removal changes the next, and gradually transform an irregular rock into a functional tool. Modern experimental archaeology has investigated how people learn these skills, and the results reveal something important. Observation helps, imitation helps, demonstration helps. Teaching can dramatically improve the transfer of complicated techniques. Now imagine doing that without saying, "Not there, turn it, hit this edge, softer." An experienced toolmaker may have had to demonstrate. Pause, correct, guide another person's hands, then repeat the process, again and again. Knowledge moving between generations without needing a textbook or perhaps even a sentence. But hands weren't the only thing carrying information, because long before humans could explain emotion, they could probably hear it. Imagine hearing two sounds from the darkness. One is sharp, sudden high, the other is low, slow, steady. Even without words, they don't feel the same. Pitch carries information, rhythm carries information, volume carries information, and humans are extraordinarily sensitive to all three. Archaeologist Steven Mithen has argued that before fully developed language, our ancestors may have relied heavily on a more musical form of vocal communication, a system built from rhythm, pitch, emotion, and vocal imitation rather than words and grammar. You can still see traces of this in your own behavior. Listen to how adults talk to babies. The pitch changes, sentences become melodic, rhythm becomes exaggerated. A soothing voice falls gently, an excited voice rises, and none of this requires the baby to understand vocabulary. Mithen has suggested that Neanderthal communication in particular may have been highly musical. Not necessarily songs as we understand them, not lyrics, something older. Emotion and intention carried through patterned sound, meaning before words, but even if you remove the hands and remove the voice, one communication system remains, and you've been using it throughout this video without noticing. Look at someone who's frightened. You can often tell before they speak. Angry, suspicious, confused, relieved. Your brain is constantly reading tiny changes in faces and bodies. Eyes, brows, mouth, head position, where someone is looking, and imagine how important that becomes when speech is limited. A hunter suddenly stops. His eyes lock onto something behind you. His posture changes. He doesn't need to say, "There's something in the grass," you turn around, meaning has already transferred. And now we can finally reconstruct something remarkable. Not exactly what prehistoric people said, because we'll probably never know, but what communication before modern language may have felt like. So for a moment, go back 500,000 years. Morning. A child is crying. Its mother pulls it close and makes a low repeating sound. The rhythm slows, the child settles. No explanation is necessary. Later, several hunters move through tall grass. One suddenly freezes, the others notice. He looks toward the grass, then back at them. A tiny movement of the head, everyone changes position, no one speaks. Hours later, an experienced toolmaker sits beside someone younger. Stone strikes stone. Crack. A flake breaks away. The younger person tries. Wrong angle. The older person reaches over, turns the stone, guides the wrist. Again. Crack. Better. And after sunset, the group gathers around a fire. Faces flicker in the light, hands move, people imitate things they saw during the day, sounds rise and fall, someone makes a gesture, someone else reacts. Maybe laughter existed before anyone had a word for laughter. Maybe grief was shared before anyone could name the dead. Maybe a child understood reassurance thousands of generations before anyone could say, "You're safe," because language didn't create those experiences. It gave them names, and that leads to the biggest reversal in this entire story. We usually tell the story like this: humans developed language, language allowed cooperation, and cooperation allowed civilization, but some researchers argue that important parts of that sequence may run the other way. Our ancestors were already intensely social, they were already raising unusually dependent children, already coordinating, imitating, teaching, sharing attention, reading emotion, building trust. In other words, language didn't necessarily create the human social world, it may have emerged from it. Before you can tell someone what you're thinking, you need to care whether they understand. Before you can teach with words, you need the impulse to teach. Before you can have a conversation, two minds first have to meet. And our ancestors had been practicing that for an extraordinarily long time, which means language may not have been the beginning of human communication. It was an upgrade, an incredibly powerful one, but an upgrade to a system already running. And strangely, that ancient system never disappeared. Every conversation you have still runs on it. You point. You change your tone. You raise an eyebrow. You pause. You look towards something and expect another person to follow your gaze. Sometimes someone looks at you and you know immediately that something is wrong. No sentence required. Those behaviors reach deeper into our evolutionary history than any language spoken today. Words came later. Underneath them is something older. Attention, gesture, rhythm, expression. The ability to look into another person's eyes and somehow make your mind understood. So the next time you're sitting beside a fire, or across a table, or on a couch beside someone you love, and they go quiet and just look at you, and somehow you understand exactly what they mean. Think about that. Because for a moment, you're communicating in a way your ancestors may have recognized hundreds of thousands of years ago. Before dictionaries, before grammar, before anyone could write down a thought, before there was even a word for word.